This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Thanks very much for coming to today's MSPS colloquium with our speaker, Associate Professor Sarah Durkin. She's come from Cancer Council Victoria to speak today, and she's actually coming home in some ways. So Sarah did her PhD here, completed in 2004 before moving on to the Cancer Council, and she actually did that while transitioning or while finishing her PhD, and she's now also an honorary appointment in the school. So I think Sarah really embodies the spirit that we really hope to see in a lot of our current and recent graduates around having impact outside of the academy and really translating research into work that has impact on people's lives. And of course, that's something that we're very keen to pursue in the school at the moment with the new behaviour change initiative. So it's great to have people like Sarah on board who can come and be a part of that vision. So please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm not sure I'd usually do a welcome or an acknowledgement of Indigenous people at your colloquia, so I'd like to acknowledge any Indigenous people in the room and elders past, present and future. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about some of the work that I've been doing at the Cancer Council over more than 10 years, looking at ways of evaluating the impact of mass media population health campaigns, and looking at that data to try and figure out ways that we can optimise campaigns as well. So about 30% of new cancer cases in Australia are attributable to preventable behavioural factors, including tobacco, which is the largest cause, UV radiation, overweight and obesity, and alcohol. And that's why at the Cancer Council we focus heavily on those factors, and we've conducted campaigns. You'll probably be familiar with the Quit campaign and the SunSmart campaign over about 3 decades, and more recently we've been looking into campaigns around healthy weight, and we're almost at the cusp of looking in getting some work done for alcohol harm prevention as well. Before we go into the detail of the impact of those campaigns, I'd first like to just talk to you about how we understand the campaigns actually working, so how we think that they're working on population health behaviours. So there's very good evidence that mass media works by directly changing individuals' behaviour. And for issues where there's less knowledge, so something like the impact of or the importance of early bowel cancer screening to detect and successfully treat bowel cancer, there's actually not that much knowledge in the community about that. So the campaigns around that are about simple learning. And also they can have effects through priming. So the more times you see an ad about bowel cancer screening, for example, the more likely it is when you get the kit, if you're 50 to 74 that is, when you get the kit in the mail, you're more likely to do it. The other way that we think that campaigns work on individual behaviour is through emotion, so emotion activation. So we think that emotion is really important in terms of just associating, so negative, for example, for smoking, the negative health effects and the really strong emotions that we show in those ads work by undermining positive perceptions of smoking by that association, and also can create kind of cognitive dissonance when people are actually in the act of smoking. So those are kind of ways that we think it works at the individual level. But we also think that mass media campaigns work by triggering social interaction, social discussion around issues. So, for example, a family might be watching TV, and anti-smoking ad comes on, and the children are there watching it with them, and they're like, "Mum, Dad, you've really got to stop smoking. Like, you're going to die." And that's a way that it might actually have an impact on behaviour, and it reinforces the message that way. But also having the messages repeatedly aired over numbers of years actually can work to change the underlying implicit social expectation about the behaviour, and can change slowly change the social norms around a behaviour, which I think we've seen with smoking over the last few decades. And it can also increase the broader kind of support from the social network around the person with the problem behaviour. So you're getting family and friends, uncles, aunties, all kind of singing the same song about really you should give up, that kind of thing. The other way that we think that campaigns work is by increasing that much broader public understanding of the reasons and why the behaviour is a problem. And so that makes it much easier for politicians to then enact policy changes about a particular issue. So bringing in smoke-free pubs, for example, back in 2007, I think it was here, there was a lot of momentum and understanding in the community because of the decades of campaigning about the need for the policy change. And so therefore it's much easier for the politician to get up and say, yep, we're going to do this, implement it, and then it's much more likely to be accepted by the public once it's put in place as well. So by activating that broader public support, getting interpersonal discussions going and having those more supportive social norms, and by actually motivating individuals at that individual level as well, we think that mass media campaigns can provide an environment, a broad environment, which facilitates and supports the desired behaviour change. Okay, and the thing that actually drives that, which is an issue these days because of the declining viewing of TV, is the mass reach of TV campaigns. So we've been able to do this by being able to get everyone, not just the target person who's got the problem behaviour, but everyone in the community exposed to these messages. So that's kind of the thing that's been driving that. So that's something that I'll come back to later on in the talk, that we're facing quite a big challenge now with this movement towards online and social media consumption, about how do we get that kind of broad reach of campaigns. Okay, so the evidence. What does the evidence say? Well, there was a Lancet review conducted in 2010, and it was a review of reviews. So there was hundreds and hundreds of published studies that were considered in this review. And overall, it concluded that mass media campaigns can change population health behaviours, and there was strong evidence for tobacco, vaccination, drink driving, but less evidence for other behaviours like screening. And there was less evidence in other countries for sun protection, but in Australia there's quite good evidence for sun protection campaigns. Some of the common factors, they highlighted some of the common factors that increase the likelihood of campaign success, and I'll go on to discuss those in a little bit. But first, I'd just like to use some examples of some of the research that we've done at the Cancer Council to inform campaign development, and also some of the ways that we've looked to measure the impact of campaigns. Okay, so before a campaign goes to air, we do quite a bit of formative research. So we routinely conduct this kind of formative research to make sure that when we put all that money into a campaign going on to air, that it's likely to have an effect. So some of the ways that we try and inform what the campaign aims are and what the brief to the media agency that develops the concepts are is to look at our population monitoring data. So we do regular population monitoring of smoking behaviours, sun protection behaviours, healthy eating, those kind of behaviours within the Cancer Council. So we look at that data to see whether there's any particular gaps in knowledge that need filling. So for example, one of the gaps in knowledge was around UV and heat. So people thought that it was high UV when it was hot. And so that was a knowledge gap that we had to change to educate people that it can be like a coolish day, 21 degrees, for example, and it still be very high UV. So this is an app that was developed. I don't know if you can see this is something you can put on your phone to check what the UV is like and actually see it in the air. That's something that SunSmart developed. And we can also examine or identify what kinds of things might be best in terms of motivating people to change. So, for example, we know from a lot of work we've done that health effects and the cost of smoking are two really big motivators to get people to try to quit. And then, there are other things like self-efficacy that might need boosting, and, identifying some barriers to change. And barriers for bowel cancer screening is one of the big things that we're trying to deal with at the moment, as you can understand. Might be a bit icky. then often when we think we've kind of got an idea that where we want to go with the campaign, we'll do exploratory focus groups to try and get a good, really rich sense of what the lived experience of that behaviour is like in the community. So we do some in-depth exploratory focus groups then. And then we develop a brief for an immediate agency. They'll come back with 4 or 5 concepts that we might narrow down to 3 or 4, and then we'll do some concept testing with the target group and potentially with the secondary target group as well. So, for example, with smokers, it might be smokers aged 25 to 49-year-old, and then we might also want to include some of their family and friends just to see what the impact might be on them as well. And so that will narrow down which kind of concept we think's got legs that we might work, and then we'll often do interviews with stakeholders, so like clinicians. So for example, there was a campaign that we ran a while ago about mouth cancer and smoking, and we did a lot of interviews with clinicians to figure out what it looked like, what the impact was on the person who has it, so that we could really inform the look and feel of the ad and what kind of the supportive material around the ad as well. And we often involve peak bodies like the National Heart Foundation or Diabetes or other organisations that might support us as well and launch a campaign with them. And also when we've got the final script of the ad, we're always tweaking it towards the end with advice from epidemiologists and other experts like the Bureau of Meteorology, making sure we've got the wording exactly right so we're not saying the wrong thing, it's not inaccurate. We often have to change things at the last minute because it's not quite right. Okay, so that's the formative research. So then once we've developed the campaign, we'll often use field experiments like this one to examine the reach and the impact of the campaign. And this one used survey data where we had CADI interviews, so that's computer-assisted telephone interviewing, at baseline prior to the campaign going to air, and then at follow-up in Victoria where the campaign was run. And then we did exactly the same in South Australia where the campaign didn't run, having the pre and post surveys there. And this was for a campaign about sugary drinks and how it leads to the accumulation of toxic fat, which can then lead to cancer. So that's that campaign. So as you'd hope, we found that there was much greater reach. People recognised the ad or recalled the ad much more in Victoria in the blue on the left-hand side compared to in South Australia on the right-hand side in the red. So that's kind of process evaluation. We always measure other things like attitudes and beliefs and those kind of things as well in these surveys, but I'm just showing you the reach there. And then we always measure the behaviour that we're trying to change as well. So this was the behaviour we're trying to change, frequent drinking of sugary drinks. What we found pleasingly was that there was about a 9 percentage point reduction in the consumption of 4 or more sugary drinks a week in Victoria over that time period, and there was no change in South Australia. So giving us some confidence that the campaign might have had the intended effect. And also we found that there was a trend towards increased water consumption among overweight Victorians and no change in the South Australians. So that's exactly what we were advocating in the campaign, was people to switch from sugary drinks to water, and we're seeing that that's like, some indications that might have occurred. Okay, so using a similar kind of method, but this time using objective government data about the number of kits that had been returned from the National Bowel Cancer Screening Program, we examined the impact of the campaign that was run in Victoria compared to in South Australia. So it's real world data. Sometimes you can't do a perfect experiment. So the campaign ran in Victoria, TV only in Victoria. Radio outdoor was only in Victoria. However, the like Channel 7 and Channel 9 thought they'd give us bonus national advertorials. So kind of contaminating our nice South Australian clean sample there. So we did get a bit of an upkick. You can see in the post 1 to 2 weeks of the campaign in South Australia, and that aligns with when the national editorials were broadcast. So, but there still was overall an interaction between states, and the overall impact of the campaign indicating that there was much greater effect in Victoria than in South Australia, which is good. Okay, another way that we look at the kind of the broader program of campaigns over many years is to look at population monitoring data and associate that with the level of campaign activity that's been happening over the variation over that period and the particular policies that might have come along as well. So this is population quarterly smoking prevalence data from Roy Morgan. They do a household survey that's representative. So we bought that data from them, and we bought the data about how much media how much advertising on anti-smoking campaigns has been aired over the period from Nielsen Oztam, which is the ratings people. Basically, they do all the ratings. And so we can see here when we did some time series analysis of this data that when the mass media campaigns were broadcast at adequate levels, so 4 to 6 ads per person per month, that we found that they pushed down smoking prevalence. And you can see also that the other policy changes like smoke-free restaurants and smoke-free pubs, as well as the tax increases that have happened, have also been associated with declines in smoking prevalence over that time. Okay, so we also conduct a lot of research examining the factors that might optimise campaign impact. So I'll go into that now. They include intensity, the duration, the type of message used, the amount of discussion generated by the campaigns, and the media channels used. So now I'll focus first on the intensity. So this is SunSmart evaluation data from 1987 to 2011. And you can see here that as the SunSmart advertising increases across from my right to left, your left to right, that there was a significant association with more tendency for there to be more sunscreen use and less skin exposure in people who were surveyed on the Monday or Tuesday after the prior weekend. So they're asked about what your behaviour was on that prior weekend in the surveys, and we're getting that self-reported data about, yes, I use sunscreen or not, and it's over many decades that we can see that. So you can see here that exposing people to around 3 ads a month compared to none at all was associated with about a 7 percentage point increase in sunscreen use and about a 2 percentage point reduction in the amount of skin exposed. Just going back to this graph here, what we found here was that around 4 to 6 ads per month reduced smoking prevalence by 0.3 percentage points. So you can see how you need to do this kind of analysis for different kinds of behaviours, because obviously it's much easier to put sunscreen on than it is to quit smoking. And so it's addictive behaviour, and you've got all these other pressures pushing you back to smoking. So that's why we don't assume that it's going to be the same kind of level of intensity needed for each kind of behaviour. The other interesting thing is the impact of intensity on different SES groups. So this is data from Vicky White's Australian Secondary School Students survey that we run every 3 years across Australia. So you can see on the far right, that's what happens when you've got high intensity campaigns running. So you're getting this push down in adolescent smoking uptake across all of the SES groups equally. When you've got kind of moderate campaign intensity, don't have much of an effect across anyone. And then when you have none or low intensity campaigns, you're actually getting increases in smoking uptake in adolescent groups, but it's much more pronounced in the lowest SES group than the other groups. So it's kind of a warning that, there's all these pressures that are actually contributing to pushing smoking up. You've got the tobacco industry working away, doing their best. You've got addiction. You've got other marketing techniques, etc., that help push smoking up. So if you don't have campaigns on air, that actually the smoking prevalence increases. And this is one of those graphs that we've shown to many health ministers over many years to try and convince them to keep funding campaigns. Okay, now looking at campaign duration. So kind of along the same lines, this is a graph of what happened when the South Australian mass media campaign funding was withdrawn. So in the green circles, that's when the campaign funding was in place. You can see that steady decline. This is an interrupted time series analysis that was done here. So it's steady decline in the 2 green circles before and after plain packaging. And then in the orange circle, that's the period of time when the campaign was defunded. So it's that, it works like a spring, the mass media campaigns. It kind of pushes it down and keeps it down, kind of need it there to keep everyone away from smoking, reminding them continually of why it's a bad thing. Okay, so next I'll go into the different kinds of message types. So sorry to be very focused on tobacco, but that's where most of the research has been, that's where most of the ads have been. So, so in terms of the types of messages that work, we have looked again to tobacco to see which are the most effective, because there have been so many different kinds of campaigns run internationally. So there's been a number of reviews that have looked at this question, and they show that there's quite strong evidence of effects of the negative health effects of smoking. The negative health effects types of ads on smoking and quitting behaviours. They tend to emphasise why you need to quit, and they evoke strong emotions. They often will employ personal stories from real people who've been harmed by smoking, or use graphic imagery, as I'm sure you guys have seen. And also in the US, there have been a few that have used anti-industry tactics. So there have been the ones that kind of fall into this category are the ones where there's been body bags like dumped out of the front of tobacco industry buildings. So that's kind of the ones that included in this kind of category that have been found to be effective. There's some recent research indicating that supportive messages might show promise. And these are the ones where they depict strategies for quitting and encouraging people to keep trying to quit, that kind of thing. However, this is fairly light on. There's not that much research done here, so we kind of need more to figure out exactly which types might work best and whether they need to be aired in conjunction with the negative health ads or by themselves. So anti-tobacco industry ones where they're showing kind of naming and shaming industry executives, that kind of messages, they've been quite effective for youth in the US. We haven't really used them much here because the tobacco industry is not really as prominent. They're not, they don't stick their head above the pulpit here and get attacked because we're such a strong tobacco control country. They've kind of hidden a bit, so they're a bit harder to do that kind of messaging in Australia. And also there's been lots of ads, and especially in the US, which have tried to convey that smoking's uncool or is silly, you'll lose your friends if you smoke, that kind of thing. And they've generally been found to be no good. They don't seem to work. Okay, so understanding that we know that these kind of negative health effects types of messages work well, we then went to look at some of our Quitline data to try and figure out, well, which elements of these types of messages are the things that are making them work. And we're interested particularly in the effects across SES groups, because lower SES people have got higher smoking rates. So we're always looking at those as a particularly important group to examine the effects in. So here we calculate the change in the mean number of Quitline calls per 100,000 smokers in Victoria for each of the SES groups, from the baseline number of calls from each group when there were no ads on air compared to when each of the different types of ads were on air here. So the different types of ads that we looked at, the two factors that we were looking at were narrativities based on theories about transportation being more likely to have effects, and on and high emotion, given the previous work that's shown that emotion is likely to be important. We were looking at those two things. So the first thing you'll notice is that in the low emotion non-narrative, they're not having great effects on anyone, but particularly not on the lowest SES groups. But the low emotion narrative or the high emotion non-narrative seem to work, better but best for the higher SES groups. But then when you combine the high emotion and narrative, you're getting quite equal effects across groups, and even slightly greater in the lowest SES groups. So that kind of gave us some good information about the kinds of things that we needed to do to develop the best kinds of messages that we could. So I think it's probably worth considering now why these kinds of negative health effects tend to do well across many subgroups of smokers. Often people will say to me, everyone knows that smoking's bad for you, everyone knows it kills you, why do you keep telling us about it? You don't need to tell us about it anymore, we know. The thing is that smokers know that smoking's bad for them in a general way, but they don't necessarily feel it in their gut. So they don't appreciate the size of the risk that they're taking, or understand what it might be like to be told by a doctor that you're dying and you've got to tell your kids you're going to die. They just don't, it's not, top of mind, that kind of thing for them. So the mass media campaigns can present those kinds of scenarios in a really potent and concrete way for people and bring kind of the future right up close for people. And so, yeah, the ones that elicit those really strong emotions tend to be the ones that also provoke more discussion with others and have that really strong motivational push to get people off the couch to do something. Because smokers always say, yes, I want to quit, but it's the campaigns that are trying to push it from being the sixth thing on their to-do list today to their top thing to do today. Okay, some other work that we've done kind of trying to dig into this idea of emotion more is to try and figure out which emotions are the best. So we've looked at some discrete emotion theory that Robin Narby has worked on for a number of years. And that suggests that fear should be better than sadness at generating change and getting people off the couch. And we were also wanting to get some more evidence about these positive emotions. So what is hope and inspiration doing? So we did a NHMRC Vic Health partnership study, and we looked at weekly cross-sectional survey of smokers and recent quitters from 2012 to 2015, and we measured past month quit attempts. And then we associated that with the level of exposure to those four different types of ads that were predominantly evoking different emotions in the 2 months prior to when the quit attempt would have occurred. So what we found was that greater exposure to the fear-evoking ads significantly increased the odds of making a quit attempt. And this shows that they were similarly effective across the lower and higher SES groups here. Greater exposure to ads evoking a combination of negative emotions, so the ones that had fear, guilt and sadness together. Some of the ads we just couldn't differentiate into one emotion or not. They were definitely a combination. So they also increased quit attempts, but it seemed to be more among the lower SES than the higher SES that was happening. And also we found that the sadness or the hope-evoking ads did not independently drive quit attempts. So that was really good information for us to avoid really high sadness kinds of ads and to not just put hope-evoking ads on by themselves. Obviously, we need to replicate this and do more work to make sure it's not just this particular sample that we have this effect in. So, but that's a start to examine that. Okay, so with an area like alcohol, where there's been less work in Australia, our approach is not to kind of try and reinvent the wheel, but to look at what else has been done internationally. What we've done here is a content analysis of all the ads that we could find that were produced between 2006 and 2014 from around the world. And we coded each ad for topic, the objective, drinking guidelines, and the target group, whether it was young adults, parents, etc. And we conducted an online study where we randomly exposed people to a random set of 4 of these ads and then examined their responses in terms of the perceived effectiveness, believability, relevance, extent to which people said that it was going to motivate them to avoid excessive drinking the next weekend, those kind of things. And we found that this is the ranking of the ads. And what we found that the top-ranked ads were more likely compared to the lower-ranked ads to directly communicate a why change message. So why you should change your drinking behaviour rather than a how to change kind of message. They were the ones that warned about the long-term health effects rather than the short-term health effects. So that's quite interesting because some population survey data indicated that the longer-term health effects were actually ones that people had no idea about, like that alcohol is a significant cause of breast cancer, etc. People were thinking more of the injuries and all of those kind of things with binge drinking, I think. They were the ones that included the low-risk drinking guidelines, and they were targeted to a more general audience than particularly parents or youth. So that provides some really good information for us to now think about, well, if we're going to produce our own ad or we can even run one of these ads, we might run the Spread campaign, which was aired in WA, has been airing there for a number of years. So it's kind of gives us a good sense of what to do there. Okay, now moving on to campaign discussion. So Emily Brennan, along with Yoshi and Melanie and I, as part of her PhD, examined the question of campaign-generated discussion. And in this example that I'm going to show you here, she examined the evaluation data from 6 different campaigns that Quit had run over the years using this natural exposure methodology. And so this is a methodology where smokers are exposed to a TV ad in their own home while watching a program that they usually watch. And that's how they're recruited. So Roy Morgan have a database of, whether people are smokers or not and what kind of TV programs they normally watch. Ring them up. You're going to watch that program tonight, on Monday. Yes, we know that the ad's going to be aired in that program. So then we call them up about 2 to 3 days later and say, hi, did you watch that program? Yes or no? What ads do you remember seeing? And then, if they don't, we kind of prompt them further and further if they don't recall it, so that we get kind of this very natural measure of recall, and then we get them to recall the discussions that they actually had around that ad, if any. Ooh. So what Emily found was that overall, 23% of the conversations included a negative appraisal of the ads, such as I think they did, they made the ad wrong. It wasn't a good ad. That 26% of conversations included positive appraisals, including comments such as, I said to my daughter, it made me think. The remaining 51% of conversations were neutral in their appraisal. She also found that 27% of all the conversations included some talk about feelings or emotional reactions to the ad, and these included statements such as, we discussed how sad it is and how sad it would be if you die. And 25% of conversations included some talk about quitting, such as, my child told me, or my children told me to stop smoking or to quit. So Emily looked at the relationships between these kinds of conversations and the cognitive and emotional responses to the ads. And what she found was that the different types of talk actually had a different kind of relationship to those outcomes. So you'll see, compared to the people in the top box where they didn't talk about the ad, those whose conversation included a negative appraisal were less likely to experience positive ad responses, whereas the odds were about double for those whose conversation included a positive or neutral appraisal of the ad, and they were 4.5 times greater for those who had a positive or neutral appraisal of the ad, plus some talk about emotions or some talk about quitting. So that then makes us try and figure out, how do we create ads that create those kinds of discussions, those more beneficial kinds of discussions. And there's been some more work that Emily's done in the US and elsewhere that we're trying to figure that out. It's not as easy as it sounds. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to message channels, which is our current challenge. So as you would understand, there's always been a strong case required for government to invest huge amounts of money in mass reach public education campaigns. And there's been further tightening of government budgets around this over the last few years. And they have coincided with the exploding use of social and online media. And we often hear back from our media campaign planners who have to report back to government, you can just do it on social media now. You don't need TV. No one's watching TV anymore. So why can't you just do it that way? And it's much cheaper for us. We don't have to give you so much money. So our question, though, is it going to actually motivate this population behaviour change that we've been able to see with TV-led campaigns? So just on the first point about whether anyone watches TV anymore, this is Roy Morgan data right up to 2017. And you can see that, yes, there has been a declining use of or watching of TV on an average weekday. However, the majority of all the age groups there still watch TV on an average weekday, including 70% of the 18 to 24-year-olds. So it's not like they're abandoning them completely. And what we found here is that in the same data, that the lower SES groups are much more likely to be watching TV as well, compared to the higher SES groups. And I think that's something that we battle against with government often, is their higher SES groups. They watch ABC, nothing else, or they watch, Netflix. So it's difficult to convince them that other people are actually watching the stuff still. The other important consideration is the amount of time people are watching video. So behaviour change messages are very difficult to do statically with a billboard. You often need that moving image, the story that you can convey on a video to get that motivation to the level that you need it. And so here I'm showing you some Nielsen data from the last quarter of 2017 about the amount of hours people are watching video on TV versus online. And you can see here that in a typical month, about 75 hours spent watching video on TV versus about 21 hours online. So it's much more, you've got much more opportunity to get people watching your video on TV still compared to online. However, there is definitely an age gradient. So in the youngest age group, it's actually the opposite. So there's more time online video watching than TV. So this is shifting, and we need to keep an eye on it, and we need to get prepared for when that's not going to happen. When TV is not going to be the way. But it's still quite a strong, a place for us to put messages still. And one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit with governments recently is the fact that Facebook, when they've tried to do a rebranding that we don't like fake news, what did they use? They didn't use just social media and online media. They used TV, they used outdoor billboards, they used a whole range, the whole suite to get at people, because they understood that if someone's not interested in what you've got to say, you can't try and communicate with them by expecting that they're going to come to you and click on what you want them to say, what you want them to tell them. That you actually have to make it incidental so that it happens while you're walking around, while you're doing something else. You're not actually seeking out that information. So that's quite important when we're looking at how we construct campaigns for the future. How we're going to get that kind of incidental exposure is a big challenge. The other big challenge for us is these programmatic algorithms that are used to buy media online. So at the start of a campaign, you might put an ad on online video in, say, a news network site where you have to watch a video before you watch the news item that you're interested in looking at. And or you might put a banner on some kind of website that you think might be useful. And at that point, all of the smokers or anyone who comes to that website gets exposed to that banner or whatever else. But as the campaign goes on, what happens more and more is that the algorithm learns who's clicked on the banner, who's clicked on the bit of information that you're interested in. Like if it's a Facebook feed, who's actually stopped and pressed play or watched the video. And so then it retargets and just sends it back to those types of people. And they've got like all this crazy information. I'm not sure how they work it, but somehow they can figure out the types of people who are clicking on the ads, and they reserve it just to those types of people to increase their clicks through. Because that's what all the campaign media buyers want to show you at the end of a buy. Look, we got this many thousands of clicks through to your website. And for us, it's not about just clicks through, it's about broad reach. So this is a real issue for us, trying to figure out how to work against these programmatic algorithms. The other issue with online and social media compared to TV is that online and social is often solo. So you're not getting the opportunity to have everyone exposed to the message at the same time, and the kids say to the parents, come on, you've got to quit. It's not going to happen while you're watching, catch-up TV on your phone, or, you're watching something on your Facebook feed. Don't have your kids over your shoulder saying that. So that's another big issue. I think there is definitely a piece of research that we would like to do looking at whether the impact of, liking, sharing, commenting on a post in social media, what the effect of that is on people's, propensity to change their behaviour compared to if someone had a discussion at home with their close family and friends. I don't know, I think there's issues with, are they as close, are they as influential to you, these people out in your social network space? How likely are you to, if you're the non-smoker friend of someone, how likely are you to see a full-on hard-hitting anti-smoking ad and tag someone to watch it? Like it's a little bit, it's not going to happen, I don't think. So there's kind of all those kind of questions that we need to start thinking about. So at the moment, what we're advising our media buyers to do is to use TV and any other incidental forms of online video. So catch-up TV is actually quite good because you have to watch the ads. You can't skip over them. And we advise them to buy non-skippable YouTube video. It's really expensive, but I think it's useless. We're throwing away money if you're not doing that. And so have that as your vehicle for the motivational messaging. So the really strong, hard-hitting ones, make them incidental so people can't avoid them. Whereas the ones where you're actually providing some help and information about how to quit, some support for people for quitting, we're suggesting that that's where they use social media, where they use like native advertising, which is the stuff that you see if you're reading an article online and there's all that, from around the web or other stuff that you might like. That's where that native advertising is, and that's often where you have the 5 best ways to quit. And that's kind of I think a good use of online media is to use that kind of stuff for supportive messaging. So that's what we're suggesting at the moment. But this isn't going to be the way forever because everyone's moving away from TV. So we've got to figure out what to do. So this brings me to some research questions that we've got that we're trying to figure out. So I think the main one for us really is how do we create ads that are the most impactful in terms of behaviour change, and the ones that are they're going to be the ones that are most likely to be discussed and shared, so that we can increase that reach and impact, and not just with TV but online and social potentially. So one of the ways that our media buyer talks to us about doing this is this A/B market testing. So a lot of the commercial people are doing this, and they're using number of clicks and they put out a whole lot of different kinds of messages and just see which ones get clicked on more, and that's how they determine which messages they put out. So obviously there's some problems with that. We don't know anything about the people who never click on anything, and so we're never exposed to the ad. We don't know at this point whether clicking on an article or clicking on an ad has more effect than someone who sees it but doesn't click on the last bit of the ad. We don't know anything about the impact of clicking. People assume it's a good thing, but who knows? And we really need to figure out when people are more likely to click if they want help. So, do we need to try and find out when, put some stuff in other, Weight Watchers online programs or something else when they're at a teachable moment, when they're looking to change their behaviour for the better. That might be some kinds of ways that we might optimise help-seeking behaviour as well. Some other questions are whether we need to tailor our messages to specific groups. So what happens now, it's an automatic that messages are tailored to particular types of groups. So, you'd be telling with the bowel cancer screening, you'd have one kind of message for the older, the 60 to 74-year-olds with grandkids and who are starting to see the health effects, so they'd have one kind of message for that, versus one that's, the people who are Gen X but just turned 50. You can't kind of give them the same message potentially in online. So how much tailoring do we need to do to different groups? Is that actually increasing the reach, or is it reducing it? Are we only going to get to the people who are motivated to change by really tailoring things down or not? Another question is how can we work against those programmatic factors that I was talking about before, and again, how much do the comments, likes and shares on social media equate to the kinds of effects that we see in interpersonal interaction? Some kind of more, I suppose, bite-sized pieces that we could look at experimenting with are varying the extent of repetition. So I don't know if any of you guys have watched shows on catch-up TV, and like the amount of the times you see the same ad, every single ad break, the same ad. So that's, there's got to be some kind of wear-out, kind of rebound effect at some point with that much repetition. So we need to examine what's the right kind of repetition in this kind of online space. We should also look at, see whether we need to tailor the message, the actual message, or whether we can tailor the media buys. So maybe we can buy so that we get people who are hubs or nodes to actually expand the reach of the message for us, and that people trying to identify the people who might bridge online social media silos. Who are those kinds of people? How do we get the message to them, and how do we get them to pass it on? So those are some of those questions, and also looking into varying the level and types of emotion, the novelty of the message, the extent to which it surprises people, because there's some work that suggests that surprising messages are more likely to be shared, and outrage as well. And also identity cueing, I think, is something that Lucia Falzon's shown is quite prominent in terms of sharing and commenting on. If you can say that climate change, for example, for students at Melbourne Uni might be one thing that they identify with, and so anything that's supportive of non-coal energy, you might go like on that, and you're queuing to your whole social network that I'm a I'm supportive of that. So that's the kind of thing we might need to work on as well to try and increase message diffusion. So that's all the work we've been doing. I think there's obviously a lot more work to do, especially in the online social space. But it's it's been a great place for me to work because it's I get these huge databases and I'm able to examine these really big questions using those. And so thank you for having me today. And we've got some postdoc positions that are going to be advertised recently. So keep your eye out for those if you're interested in looking at those. Thanks.
About 10 minutes for questions.
I find it a bit surprising that you have this, well, it seems to be a little bit reluctance towards this social media because, obviously, there's a number issue, but it seems to be like from a psychology point of view that social media is a better, testing environment to see, which messages are effective. If you think about, Facebook or something, you could categorize to set different types of messages and tailor or target those people again with different type of, behavioral measures or something, or they click on some kind of, if you think about smoking, for example, see how much they click on the line, for example. Yeah. So I guess the question is that, how much flexibility is there in this kind of social media campaign where you can really say, for example, I want this type of algorithm or I want to diversify. I remember a couple of years ago, this kind of promotion where Facebook, saying it's kind of positive and negative messages to people, and after testing they got more or less interesting.
I think the advantage they had was they had access to all of the data. So I think Twitter, we can have access to the diffusion of the message, but I don't think we have that with Facebook. We don't. It's hard to get access to that kind of data with them. So it does limit the extent to which we can do really detailed things with Facebook, and I think Instagram as well. Is that right? Yeah.
Rabbit can
They can
do
do. It can do Instagram. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, Twitter and Instagram are definitely possible. And we have got databases. We're actually just collecting the data at the moment of the number of quit actions. So on the website there's 5 actions that people can take. Request a call back from the quit line, build a plan, which is a thing where they build their own plan, to including a quit date and how they're going to deal with cravings and all that kind of thing. There's a quit coach that they can get emails back from a coach for them, and an SMS program as well where they can get SMSs, particularly on like a Friday night before they're going out, to remind them, you want to quit, stay strong. So there is some of that going on where we're collecting that kind of information, and we are trying to link that to our campaign activity. The difficulty is with online media, it's really hard to time limit when a particular ad has been on in a particular website, because there's so much there, there's so much detail. Typically what we get back in media plans is just the total number of clicks, the total number of views, etc. So it's difficult to get that data from the buyers, because there's lots of different buyers that you've got. They use third-party buyers to buy the media in online space, so it makes it difficult to do. But it is doable, but it's just not as easy.
I'm just wondering, is it possible to actually get that information, really detailed information, for example, or where you can also decide, I want, for example, let's say, I want to send this message to 1,000 people and this message to another 1,000 people, and they get different type of feedback, or how people kind of click to these different types of messages. Is that possible to?
Yeah, I'm sure we could do that. I think we can do smaller scale message testing kinds of experiments potentially, and look at which ones get liked or shared, etc. More in terms of just how many they say on the bottom, how many shares they've had, that kind of thing we might be able to get. But I think the difficulty when we're just relying on shares, clicks, likes is we don't know who's not doing it. We don't know what's happening beyond that. And that's the bit that's the difficult bit for us, I think. And that's the part where we're not sure, who's not being exposed. And, is it just the people who are interested and already convinced that are clicking? That's the problem with that kind of work.
I was interested in the data you're presenting on that fear as a particularly potent message for people who are concerned that they are more likely, for example, what longitudinal data do you have correspondence between those messages and people engaging in treatment versus succeeding?
So that's question I've often asked myself. So all campaigns really can do is to motivate, those kind of campaigns anyway, is to motivate the quit attempt. There are so many things that happen between that attempt and making it stick long term that are out of our control, mostly. And, you know, there could be relationship breakup, there could be all sorts of life stresses that mean you relapse. So it's very hard to link it to long term, you know, quitting behaviour. The closest we get is that quarterly smoking prevalence data that I showed you from Roy Morgan, where we can see that 4 to 6 ads per person per month, 2 months later, results in a dip in smoking prevalence. So smoking prevalence is they quit. They're not. I say when I'm asked by a surveyor that comes to my house, do you smoke? You say no. So that's kind of the closest we can get to sustained prevalence, and we can see it kind of pushes it down and continues pushing it down. Often you get this rebound effect, but it's usually not quite as high as it was. So you get this quitting attempt that pushes smoking prevalence down, it comes back up because people relapse, but it's not quite as high as it used to be. So you are getting this small incremental change over time.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether that rebounding or that suppression effect is because of motivating people that way.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That, you know, you might get more sustained long-term change in people's behaviour if it's relying on other mechanisms.
I think fear obviously is very good at motivating people to act, and then there's a whole lot of other things that we put in place. We're working with health systems to try and change doctors to support people with pharmaceuticals and getting people to call the quit line so they can actually be counselled through the quit attempt to make sure they're more likely. So I think it's about 4 times more likely to succeed in your quit attempt if you use NRT and you call the quit line. So there are other things that we do to try and ensure or maximise that success rate. But it's a different question. I don't think we've actually tried really hard to do some positive messaging and some kind of messaging similar to what the quit line would actually be giving to the person on the phone. So recognising your triggers, which are the times when you're most likely to slip up, and try and keep away from Saturday night, Friday night drinks for a couple of weeks while you're trying to give up. Tell all your friends you're trying to quit so that they understand and they're not going to try and push you back into it. You know, these are all these other ways you can cope with stress and stuff other than smoking. We've tried to do those kind of messages and they don't work. They just no one remembers them because they don't cut through. That's the other thing about the negative health effects messages. You know, in all the advertising you see in a day, you need to cut through and get remembered. And so those ones just kind of, they're yeah, whatever. Whereas the negative health ones, they cut through, people notice them. And therefore they can, remember them, that keeps replaying in their head, kind of helps that motivation go along. So,
Just a couple of comments and questions. Actually, about the fear. I think you're right. It's about the motivation part would work for that. But the information acquisition part.
No.
So depending on.
Yeah, where you are. So if you're trying to. Yeah, so if you're trying to fill a knowledge gap, you're not going to do it with a fear campaign. But if you're trying to motivate, that's where you use the fear.
Another thing that the fear is good for is to draw attention to something that people are aware of. So really depending on what do you really want to achieve.
Yeah.
The fear may work.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Another thing I was going to ask you about is the sort of social context of viewing or message exposure. I think that's a really interesting question. And they kind of mentioned 2 different kinds of things, and I wanted to get your reflection on that. One is the immediate context of a message reception. So whether you're receiving this message with other loved ones around you or not. And the other question is whether or not you know that the other people are receiving the same message or not. So that's the
the broader meta kind of exposure, yeah.
So way back when, everybody was watching the ABC 7 o'clock news. Everybody knew that everybody was receiving this message most of the time. At least most of the adults were watching the same thing. That was a kind of a share that common ground and the common knowledge, or you can assume to be the case, but not anymore now. So that's a different kind of thing.
Yeah.
That the actual the common knowledge base is different, but people are not necessarily aware of it.
Yeah.
Because people tend to generalize based on their own circles. And my friend was sort of saying this, so everybody knows it. It's a kind of usual heuristic that people seem to be using. So, do you have any thoughts about that kind of different levels at which the context of viewing seems to be changing, and what sort of impacts that might have?
Yeah, I think we're okay with smoking. We've kind of done the job where everyone we're on the same page there. But I have real worries about trying to do this same kind of thing with obesity and with alcohol. Like, it's going to be really hard because we're not all on that same page. I think it's going to be really hard to convince politicians that everyone thinks this is a good thing. We need to have a tax on sugar, for example. It's getting harder and harder to do that because there are those silos of experience and understanding of what's happening in the world. And that's what I worry about with social media being or online media being the primary delivery mechanism. It's just going to get worse and worse, and we're not going to have that kind of group understanding of that this is a problem. It's going to be really hard to get that. Trying to figure out ways to do that's kind of, I think, where we need to go next.
I think we need to call this to a close. Sorry, Yoshi, but you guys can talk offline after this. But please, everyone, just join me again in thanking Sarah.